Greetings and salutations, fellow book readers. This is Mark, and the book I will review today is Man's Search for Meaning. Before we continue, this is personalized limited edition of Man's Search for Meaning with leather cover designed and made by me. At the end of the video, I will tell you a couple of ways of how you can get one for yourself if you are interested. Now, let's get back to the review. Man's Search for Meaning is a 1946 book written by Viktor Frankl, who was an Austrian neurologist and psychiatrist and developed a psychological process called Logotherapy, which basically means healing through meaning. Logotherapy is based on existential tradition, especially Kierkegaard's theories, and it focuses on finding meaning for each individual life and using it as a driving force for survival. What is Man's Search for Meaning about? Well, it is somewhat of a manual on how to find individual meaning of life. The book is a chronicle of the Frankl's experience during World War II as a prisoner in various Nazi concentration camps, including Auschwitz. It is also a psychological analysis of the survivors, and it contains plenty of practical advice for the people who are confused about their existence. Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. Now, let's do a brief summary of Man's Search for Meaning. The book is divided into 3 parts. Part 1, Experiences in a Concentration Camp, tries to answer the question, how was everyday life in a concentration camp reflected in the mind of the average person? It starts when Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist in Vienna, is rounded up by Nazis together with his family, including his pregnant wife, and then separated from all of them and sent through various concentration camps, including Auschwitz. Frankl describes harsh living conditions in the camps and mental state of the prisoners and their efforts to stay alive, such as shaving with broken glass to look younger and avoid being sent to the gas chamber. Further, he describes emotional reactions such as anger, disgust, and sense of humor, which is described as one of the soul's weapons in the fight for self-preservation. And he talks about the most important decision any prisoner could make, which was not to give up. People who had something to live for, a higher purpose to pursue, had a higher chance of survival, and Frank's personal purpose was hope of seeing his wife again, and also writing about his experiences and observations. Frankl notes that situation and environment aren't the only factors that influence a person's behavior. He argues that even in the most desperate situations, men do have a choice of action. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. And in the camps, there were 2 choices. 1, turn the life of daily survival into inner triumph, or 2, ignore the challenge and simply vegetate. Unfortunately, most people chose the second. Further, Frankl talks about suffering. He says, for life to have a meaning, then there must be meaning in suffering. The way in which a man accepts his fate and all the suffering it entails gives him a simple opportunity to add a deeper meaning to his life. Frankl observed that many people died when their expectations weren't met. He cites as an example the beginning of 1945, when people expected to be released on certain dates, and when it didn't happen, they just gave up. Here is a quote from him on how he tried to rectify the situation. We had to teach the despairing man that it did not really matter what we expected from life, but rather what life expected from us. Well, it sounds a lot like Kennedy's "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." Maybe that's where Kennedy got it from. Anyway, in part 2, Logotherapy in a nutshell, Frankl explains the basics of treating his patients. He focuses on the future and on how to deal with the consequences of the past actions and events. He also explains his way of preventing neuroses by distancing his patients from the feedback mechanism and instead focusing on the meaning of their lives. According to logotherapy, this striving to find a meaning in one's life is the primary motivational force in man. Frankl argues that struggling to achieve worthwhile goals is healthier than living without external and internal pressures. He talks about the existential vacuum created by the 20th century advances and how it manifests itself in the state of boredom, which leads to overthinking one's own life. Frankl says that the meaning of life will differ from person to person, and it will depend on the specific time in one's life. Because of that, one cannot ask what it is, but instead recognize that he is the one who needs to answer it. Ultimately, man should not ask what the meaning of life is, but rather must recognize it is he who is asked. In a word, each man is questioned by life, and can only answer to life by answering for his own life. To life he can only respond by being responsible. Then there is essence of existence that stresses that the meaning of life is to be discovered in the world rather than within oneself. Further, Frankl talks about the meaning of love and the meaning of suffering, and that man can find meaning in life when confronted with hopeless situations, but suffering is not necessary to find it. The last part is a postscript called "The Case for a Tragic Optimism," and it states that man remains optimistic in spite of what he calls a tragic triad: pain, guilt, and death. In other words, what matters is to make the best of any given situation. The man doesn't become happy because he finds happiness. Rather, he becomes happy because he finds a reason to be happy. Finally, Frankl talks about death in relation to life and how it makes every moment temporary. So why not make the most of each one you have? And that's the basic summary. Did I like Man's Search for Meaning? Well, the book was fine, but it is a type of help manual which is not my favorite category. This being said, the book contains some profound truths and practical advices. It can be helpful for the people who might feel confused about life and their place in it. It approaches the whole idea of life's purpose from the psychological side, in contrast to more common spiritual definitions. But sometimes it is difficult to separate the two. Frankl's descriptions of his experiences in the various concentration camps makes us question how anybody could survive it. His answer is a twist on Nietzsche's "What doesn't kill me makes me stronger," and it is, "He who has a strong why can survive anyhow." The fundamental part is deciding why you want to live, and when you do, you will have a chance of surviving. If you don't, you are guaranteed death. It applies to life in general. Depending on your goal, there are certain steps you must take which will give you a chance of success, and if you don't do them, you are assured failure. Also, Frankl talks about human flexibility and adaptability when he says, "Man can get used to almost anything." The proof is in the war zones, which from the outside look unlivable, but where people seem to be leading semi-normal lives. Another Frankl's quote is, "To live is to suffer, and to survive is to find meaning in the suffering." Well, the idea of suffering is not very popular, especially today. Our instinctive actions are to avoid pain and suffering, and modern technology has made it easier. We became ungrateful and have forgotten that facing challenges makes us grow, and I think because of it, we are missing an important part of being alive. When suffering, we will entertain thoughts of suicide, but most of us go on, and that's where life's meaning or purpose makes a difference. You can ask yourself, what does one do when one realizes the only thing he has to lose is his own life? And the answer might change your life. The whole philosophy of suffering was well defined by Nietzsche and Schopenhauer, and they gave us a practical perspective on it. Another thing Frank talks about is aging with dignity, to accept growing old and not envying the young. The secret is to look back at your life and appreciate all the experiences you had and lessons you learned and the knowledge and wisdom you gain over the years. And also remembering how ignorant you were before it. Most young people fear growing old. It is fear of the unknown, since they never experience it. On the other hand, most older people seem to be happy and satisfied in the place they are at and don't yearn to be young again. Maybe because they already passed through it and it is not something they would like to repeat it. A bit of criticism. To me personally, man's search for meaning felt a little like a psychology self-help manual. And this is not a subject that interests me much. I prefer to draw life's lessons from my own observations or indirectly from reading classical fiction. Probably similar to the way Viktor Frankl arrived at his own conclusions and theories. I'm also not too crazy about planning, goal setting, and the idea of constant improvement. I find it somewhat mechanical and robotic. In my life, I need a certain amount of chaos and instinctive reactions to function well. But that's me. Further, I think there also seems to be positive bias toward the book because of the tragic personal history of the author, and being the Holocaust survivor, many people feel as they should avoid criticism and like the book. Personally, when I am reviewing a book, I like to distance myself a little from it and the writer and be more of an outside observer to avoid over-emotional reactions to it. To sum it up, I will say that the man's search for meaning relevance will depend on the psychological place one finds himself in. Some people will find it enlightening and life-changing, and others will nod and murmur, "I heard it all before." And I find myself in the latter group. Perhaps the basic answer to the question of meaning of life is to live, and then each one can make it as simple or as complex as it fits his needs. The desire to live connects us to all the life organisms on Earth, and this is the fundamental meaning of life, and it is enough for many. It seems that people who are not occupied living are the ones looking for the deeper meaning or purpose. It might be the case of having too much free time. It seems the more leisure time society offers us, the more we question life's purpose. For me personally, the strongest message from the book was how when you lose everything, you start to appreciate the smallest and the most insignificant things, such as the taste of a crumb of bread or a view of a green tree branch, as Frank describes in this sad experience he had in the camp. The young woman knew that she would die in the next few days. But when I talked to her, she was cheerful in spite of this knowledge. "I am grateful that fate has hit me so hard," she told me. "In my former life, I was spoiled and did not take spiritual accomplishments seriously." Pointing through the window of the hut, she said, This tree here is the only friend I have in my loneliness. Through that window, she could see just one branch of a chestnut tree, and on the branch were 2 blossoms. I often talk to this tree, she said to me. Okay, let's talk about the physical book. The book I am holding is a paperback which I transform into hardcover leather-bound edition. To make the cover, I use grade A, naturally tanned hide I buy from a tanner in North Spain. It is the same leather Louis Vuitton uses to make his bags, so it is top quality. I do all the processing of leather myself. First, I designed the cover, which what I did here. I found this art of a Jewish man immobilized in a concrete tomb with the Christian cross, but not giving up and holding onto his Jewish identity by improvising Star of David. The background is a desolate and barren landscape, which relates to the destruction of the World War II. For me, this image symbolizes the plight of people like Viktor Frankl in the Holocaust, and at the same time reflects the message of hope in the book. This is the back, and inside of the cover I printed this message. Those who have a why to live can bear with almost any how. If you want to see a more detailed video where I explain how I transform paperback into leather-bound hardcover, click on the link in the description. I will make a maximum of 100 editions of each title. Each one will be numbered and initialed, and the numbers will go in chronological order from 2 up, since number 1 stays with me. The price will be around $100, so if you would like me to make one for you, you can click below on my email and send me a message. I do not guarantee I will do it, since it will depend on the time I have available, access to leather, and if I can get my hands on the copy of the book. Now, if you're not willing to spend the $100 but you still want the book, what you can do is click below on the PayPal link and donate $3 or more to my channel, and for every 100 donations I will make a lottery and draw one name, and the winner will receive the book. So, if you are cheap but feel lucky, this might be the way to do it. Also, your donations give me the extra motivation to make the book reviews, and I appreciate them very much, so thank you in advance. One more thing, when you make your donation, remember to include the title of the book you would like to win. The book itself is beautiful. Visually it has a very nice texture, it smells great, and the more you handle it, the more beautiful it will become. And it makes a great gift for yourself or somebody who appreciates books. So, if you want one, don't snooze or you might lose. Well, that's it. So, let's end it here. And until next time, keep your ear close to the ground and read a book. Adios.